Yeah.
Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Christina.
And I'm Christina Hoff-Summers.
And we just got back from
Canada.
Road trip.
So what do you call a sophisticated American?
What?
A Canadian.
Aw, that's a nice Canadian joke.
No, I was so impressed with Toronto. I've been there before.
It's looking like Hong Kong. Like every month you're there, there's like new glass condos.
Fantastic restaurants.
Yes.
And shopping.
Yes.
Very, very dangerous.
Well, compared to Washington, it's never changed. Even though they say Washington is becoming a more sophisticated city, you still go to the shops, and it's like everybody wants you to dress like Madeleine Albright. You know, they're like suits with gold buttons, and it's like the most boring stuff. It's like
Boxy and sensible.
Boxy and sensible,
And Canada's not doing that. I mean, I don't know. Are they catering to Hong Kong or to the wealthiest people in Asia?
There's a lot of crazy rich Asians.
Yeah,
now
there's a crazy
in Toronto.
rich Asian vibe.
And we saw that. We went to Holt Renfrew.
Yes, Holt Renfrew.
Which is like the most beautiful department store in the world. And we saw all these crazy designs, which you never see here.
And they even have higher-end demonstrators.
We did. We walked through. Okay, so we have to say the reason we were there was to lend support to Mr. Danielle Christina, also known as David Frum, who was debating Steve Bannon.
And not only debating Steve Bannon, but defending free speech, because there were hordes of demonstrators thinking that the debate should not take place.
Well, that was right. So it's on. Imagine it's one of their largest concert hall spaces. It held over 2,000 people, and there was a lot of pushback.
2,000.
Okay, it wasn't a stadium. Okay, it's not like a hockey arena. Yeah. We got big hockey arenas. Okay, it was like Roy Thomson Hall, which is like the Carnegie Hall of Toronto. Mm. And do you notice how Canadians always have to compare things to Americans to make Americans understand? You know, we have to say it's like the Carnegie Hall.
Yes, I get.
Anyway, so he's there, but then there became, after the Pittsburgh shooting.
Even before.
No, the Pittsburgh shooting. Yeah, that's true. Before, there were people saying that the debate shouldn't take place. It was a debate on populism versus liberal democracy, which side was going to win. That wasn't the exact question, but that was the thrust of the debate. And there was, when we pulled up, there was just this amazing number of demonstrators. And I got a little scared because I knew there'd be demonstrations. But when you see like these hordes out for your husband or against your husband and Steve Bannon, it kind of freaked me out a bit.
I wasn't freaked out. They were all sort of dressed up, with little hats and coats and mittens.
Toques.
What are toques?
Toques? Toques are little knit hats.
Oh, toques. Okay. And they were I just looked at the faces, and someone brought music.
Oh, there was a DJ playing Drake, which was incredible. But yeah,
and so Beach Boys songs and things. No,
they were playing Drake.
Oh, okay.
Who is Canadian, by the way?
Well, not the Beach Boys. But anyway, there was just something a little more decorous and.
I don't think so. I think you're romanticizing it. But I think the thing that we took away that I loved, because it's just before what we call Remembrance Day, November 11th, and every single person was wearing a poppy.
Even the demonstrators?
Oh, well, this was one of the funniest scenes. The demonstrators were the line was so long to get into the hall that the demonstrators, they hadn't really actually separated the demonstrators from the people lining up to get in the hall, which normally there's a kind of cordon off. So there were real in-your-face things, including the demonstrators shouting Nazis at Holocaust survivors, quite literally, or people who had grandchildren. We met a woman who'd been called a Nazi.
And she lost her family in the hall.
But one of my favorite scenes was there's a man wearing a poppy. And we can explain why Canadians wear poppies, but Americans don't. It's not American custom.
Will you please explain the poppy, because people don't know? Okay,
so they wear these little poppies and to remember it's really the First World War.
Right.
And Canadians and Brits wear these poppies in their lapel to remember it, because really more than the United States, that was a British-Canadian war that devastated.
Horrible
just
loss.
Devastated.
Whole generation of young men.
And in Britain, you actually buy poppies that are handmade. Well, to the degree they still survive, but used to be handmade by veterans, and they were sort of these folded paper things. But in Canada, there's always been, more mass-produced poppies. But what was striking was everybody in our hotel, everybody wears a poppy. And it's really actually moving and nice. And you, to the point that we had to get you one because you felt kind of naked without the poppy.
Frightened, actually, to go out with that one.
You might get assaulted. Yeah. But so anyway, so this old man is waiting in line to see the debate, and he's wearing a poppy. And a demonstrator comes up and gets in his face. This was on TV. And he says, "Aren't you ashamed to wear your poppy?" And the old man looks and goes, "Where's your poppy?" Anyway, but that was great. You love Canada.
I love Canada. But we're very excited about today's interview.
Right.
With our bestie.
It's another one of our great besties, Anne Applebaum. Should I just run through the fem facts and then we can describe what she's really like? Yeah. Who she really is. So Anne Applebaum is columnist for the Washington Post, Pulitzer-prize winner for Gulag, a history. She wrote, after Solzhenitsyn, or maybe more than Solzhenitsyn, one of the most definitive histories of the Russian Gulag. Her recent book, another upper, is Red Famine, Stalin's War in the Ukraine. Can I just mention, I kind of co-authored a cookbook. A Polish cookbook with Anne.
Has another side.
She has this whole other side to her. This
Pulitzer-prize Solzhenitsyn
historian, very serious and very grim, because she tackles extremely grim
serious
topics.
Problems. But then there's cookbook Anne.
There's entertainment
and
best friend
Anne.
and shopping Anne.
And drinking Anne.
And drinking Anne. And Anne, as we found out, I met Anne before you. I thought you'd known her as long. I've known her since before the fall of the Berlin Wall.
I met her a year or two after.
Right. Remember that she and her husband Radek, who is a Polish politician, and we'll talk about him when we talk to Anne, after communism fell, they went back to Poland, where Radek is from, and they built out of nothing this. It had been inhabited by sheep and sort of stray tenants, this manor house that had fallen completely into disrepair. And they bought it for nothing. I think literally it was $1,000 or something. And over the next 10 years, they restored it to the most
so
beautiful house. And what was sort of amazing is they didn't use an architect. It was all done with sort of local builders with Anne and Radek's vision.
And it's beautifully decorated, and I don't think they had an interior decorator.
No, Anne did it. Anne and Radek did everything. And we all went for a weekend, in 2008.
Went with Ayaan
Hirsi Ayaan Hirsi, you, me, David, Anne, and Radek, and we'd never been to the house. And we pull up. And it's the most remarkable thing we've ever seen. And Anne...
And sometimes when you visit your friends who are intellectuals, you're not necessarily going to get fed.
Or you don't want to stay with them.
You don't want to stay with them.
I'm too old for that sofa, thanks. I'll go to the inn.
The most beautiful house and the most elegant meals.
Well, because Anne likes to entertain. She likes to cook. And she and I both share this passion of having dinner parties and things and cooking. And she had this whole vegetable garden. And then also the Polish food at that point. Poland had come out of, obviously, its communist era. David and I had been there just after communism fell, but the food was still communistic. Yeah. And it was horrible. It was vinegar. Oh, it was terrifying. Vinegar salads. And it is disgusting. You almost literally starved.
Potatoes.
Everything was bad. And then suddenly there are these, pierogi restaurants that are like dim sum, and they're reviving the old cuisine and
this beet soup.
Beet soups, but a beet soup you've never experienced.
Like vichyssoise, but with beet.
Right. And she was turning out these incredible dishes in her spare time. You never see it effortlessly. Although she's pulling the arugula from the garden and everything like that. And then we were sort of marveling at both the New Poland and Anne and Radek really seemed to represent the New Poland, this, younger couple who had embraced. Roddick had come back after being
and they were like going to be the
dissident,
the John and Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy of Poland. And I thought she would help like revive, because they have a beautiful traditional architecture,
right,
and gardens, and she was, it was going to be Camelot of Poland.
It was going to be Camelot of Poland, and no,
but it may happen.
But what did I do? Because I am super bossy, right?
She's bossy.
I'm really bossy. Who bossied you into doing this podcast?
Danielle.
So I walked into Anne's house. I looked around. I said, "This is magnificent. We had the great food, and we had this incredible food in Warsaw." I said, "Anne, your husband's a politician. You've embraced this. You have to do a Polish cookbook." And partly also, she's Jewish, we're Jewish, and we're completely afflicted with Ashkenazi Polish food over here, which is food from Eastern Europe that the poor Polish Jewish immigrants brought us, and it's disgusting.
So this takes it up.
So this was like, hey, Polish Ashkenazi food does not have to be disgusting. It's like this, as you say, this borscht that is like
not like
ethereal,
the borscht
in the can. And so I said, Anne, you have to do a cookbook. And at that point, she was on her next book, I guess the Ukraine famine. And she said, I can't, I'm too busy. I'm writing my next book. And I said, yeah, but it's so great in this house.
Danielle wore her down.
And finally, I finally said, okay, I'll help you. We'll do it together. And we did. And we traded recipes across the ocean. And then we spent a magical 2 weeks in the summer photographing it in this house and bringing all these, some very traditional recipes, but others sort of nouvelle versions, made palatable for an American audience. It was just the most magical thing. And when Roddick went on to run for president, which he did, she got a lot of, as you can imagine, hostile press, and they started to call us and me as her co-author to say, like, they had to get dirt, like what is Anne Applebaum really like? What is she doing? And I would say, well, Anne wrote this book because she loves Poland. She loves its food. She loves its people. It's her adopted home. And then they would go away angry. But anyway, so yes, From a Polish Country House Kitchen. It's on Amazon. Aside from that, yeah, she wrote some other books. I don't know. Yeah. Kind of important. But she's the most serious person we know. I think we can jolly her out of that seriousness. But
she's everything. She's very serious-minded, but she has a fun side and a creative side. And she's also like the world's most loving mother. Yeah. She has these two wonderful, now grown-up children, but we watch them grow up. And
tell one story before we bring her on. You guys, we took a trip to Paris together.
Yeah, we were all in Paris. We were having a good time, but
you decided to take a night. It's called a fat bike tour. A night bike tour, yeah, which I said,
my idea.
I'm not going to do.
I do them in every city, and I recommend them to our audience. It's just,
I went to the cafe.
You get a little exercise, and you're not in a bus or something. You get oriented. Anyway, we did one.
I was see Paris by night with lights.
Yes,
it was cold.
It didn't work out. We had a very bossy leader.
No, he was a dude leader. He was an American, surfer leading.
Who knew nothing.
Right.
And right. Anne was really like the guest he did not want. We're going towards the Ile Saint-Louis. We're passing on the bridge, and we're looking at Notre Dame. And he says, this is a really old church, everyone. Like old. Old. And by that time just couldn't take it. And she said, well, I'm a historian, and why would you just say it's old? She got very specific.
Let me tell you about the history.
Wow. You're okay.
Okay. And then, I have to say, I like to be up for things, but going at night when it was cold through Paris, and you guys almost got killed by cars. You were on expressways. You almost had
Somebody said that. It happened to me, but I didn't know it.
Anyway, we will bring on Anne, and the thing we wanted to talk to her specifically about was this recent article that she wrote for The Atlantic magazine called A Warning from Europe, The Worst Is Yet to Come, Polarization, Conspiracy Theories, Attacks on the Free Press, An Obsession with Loyalty. That's how it was headlined. But it was really a story about how friendships and family fractures are changing with politics in ways that I think we as Americans have not seen recently in our time, in the ways, and she lives in London part of the time, where we've seen with Brexit, and very vividly in Poland, that it feels like the world at times has gone mad, that your friends are suddenly following conspiracy theories. You're not talking to members of family. So she has experienced that maybe to the power of 11. But we're going to bring her on to talk about how do we all get through these very politically fractured times on a personal level, and can we have hope? But Anne can be so gloomy, I'm not sure.
No, but I do posit a law that I want her to commit to, a principle of happy reversals.
Happy outcomes.
Happy outcomes.
Happy
the law
endings.
of happy surprises, or...
Well, we're American.
We're American.
We believe in Disney. We want it all to work out.
All right. It's all going to work out.
Let's bring Anne on. You know, Christina, on weekends, I have what we call a favorite time of day. That's when I'm lying in bed in the mornings, reading and drinking coffee, and usually there's a Labrador or two next to me. But you know what's made it even better lately?
What?
My new Brooklinen sheets. They make me feel like I'm lazing in a 5-star hotel.
I love my sheets too, and so does my little dog Izzy. They make the bed feel so luxurious, but not with the 5-star price tag.
I know, and the story behind them is great too. A few years ago, a young couple named Vicky and Rich Fulop stayed at the Luxury Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas. The sheets were so wonderful, they asked the hotel where they could buy them for their own home. But when they found out they'd cost hundreds of dollars, they decided to make 5-star hotel quality sheets more affordable and easy to order. And that's how Brooklinen started.
Yes, I understand. And that most bedding is marked up like 300%. But the Fullops figured out that if they worked directly with the manufacturers and customers without the middleman, they could deliver high-quality sheets for much less.
And that's how Brooklinen has become the fastest-growing brand in the world, with over 30,000 5-star reviews. And they don't just feel great, if I may say, but they look great, too. You can mix and match over 20 colors and patterns. It's one-stop affordable shopping, and with the holidays, it's a great time to stock up for gifts and visitors.
My Brooklinen sheets are the best, most comfortable sheets I have ever slept on.
The only way to get $20 off and free shipping is to use promo code FEMSPLAIN at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com. Promo code FEMSPLAIN. Brooklinen, these really are the best sheets ever.
And our dogs agree. Welcome to the Femsplainers.
Thank you. I'm so glad to finally be here.
Yes, and we're so glad to have a friend who still speaks to us.
I'm still speaking to you.
Maybe vice versa.
Because that will be one of our topics. Friends, circles that have separated over politics in recent years.
Which, Anne, I believe you are an expert about at this
point. On 3 continents? Well, 2 continents.
Two continents, 3 countries. Yes.
Explain,
yes. So I'm American, but I live part of the time in London and part of the time in Poland, where in all 3 places I have watched polarization, particularly on the right, although not only, divide people from their friends and from their parents and from their families. I saw it happen in London following the Brexit vote. You now cannot have a dinner party in London where you invite people from both sides who care about it. I saw it happen particularly in Poland, where my husband was in politics, and where we saw our group of friends divide really profoundly over a course of about 10 years between that had been a kind of center-right group, and it became, center-right and nationalist populist right.
And these were friends, the best of friends, because you'd gone through the efforts to liberate Poland from the clutches of the Soviet Union. You'd been in that fight together, and then this separation. So it's very painful.
Yeah, you described in your article in The Atlantic at the beginning the party that you held at the 2000, the end of the start of the new Millennium Party.
My Millennium Party.
And it's so poignant, your description of all the friends who were at that party that night, which, by the way, sounds like a wild and fantastic party. And then you just wrote about how now half of those people cross the other side of the street when they see you. Half of them, another half have gone crazy. And so, and you've been writing about this. And this article is important because I think every American is going to identify with what happened to you, you know, in the past, 5 years is now overtaken us here in the past couple of years since the election of Donald Trump. That your friends, as you describe them, it's like suddenly half of them are seized with a kind of madness.
That's what it seemed like to me. I mean, I try, it's a very long article, and I try and explain it in other ways. It's not just about madness, but yes, so we were all, it felt like part of the same group. We had the same goals. We had just overthrown communism. We were all in our 30s. We thought Poland was going to join the West and it was going to be part of NATO and the European Union. And we were all more or less in agreement. You know, I think you would have called most of us at that time kind of center-right, kind of Thatcherite maybe, kind of, we believed in markets and we believed in liberal democracy. More or less, it felt like we were all on the same team. But what's happened over the subsequent couple of decades, 18 years, is that some of us, I think, are still believe those things and are still part of that same...
The belief in liberal democracy.
We still believe in liberal democracy. And then a part of my Polish, what had then been my Polish circle, drifted farther to the right. And some of them became... I mean, one hesitates using these words because they mean different things to different people, but they are, they are nationalists. They are anti-European. In some cases, they're anti-American. In some cases, they've acquired. It's not. I wouldn't accuse them of anti-Semitism because that's going too far. But they've acquired sort of phobias about Jews and others who are trying to infiltrate and undermine Poland. And most of all, they've become followers of, in some cases, leaders of, in some cases, journalists who are part of this far-right political party that now runs the country. But this includes people who were, godparents of my children. It includes people who were, who I used to see all the time. It includes people who my husband was very close to or who worked with at different times. One person who wasn't at the party but who was a friend of his who actually co-wrote a book with him he would no longer speak to. So, it's a kind of, you have to imagine a social circle where everybody was friendly. And then we had this very profound split.
And you drew parallels of this to sort of pre-World War II when the writers like Orwell and Kessler were talking about watching people that they had
there's a
intellectuals.
There's a particular writer who I've thought about a lot. He's actually a Romanian writer. He's not that famous, but he did write these very well-known diaries called Mihail Sebastian. And his diaries, he was Jewish, and lots of his friends were on the Romanian right, kind of, but they were sort of European, they read Proust, they went to Paris, and then he watched over the 1930s as they sort of drifted away from him. And he had this experience of walking into a room where his friends were, and they would all stop talking as soon as he would come in because they were pulling farther to the right, and he was sort of Jewish, so he couldn't go there. And this, I don't think Poland is, I don't put it in that same category, but I certainly had the experience of walking into a room and having everybody stop talking because, somebody who's on the wrong side has come in the room.
One of the things you write about in the article, or maybe not in the article, I don't remember if it's here or a speech that I heard you give, is this the people that are susceptible to conspiracy theories, and a lot of them are among your friends, that you wouldn't have expected it. You can't think back and see that they were...
we all have that relative on Facebook, and and it's seized so many beyond, including people.
So I tried in my article, and also I actually spent about 2 years trying to figure out how to write this article because it's something that's been bothering me for a long time. You almost have to go person by person and look at people's biographies and see why it happened. But there are some things that hold groups together. I mean, one of them is people who feel that they personally have been left behind, or they personally haven't achieved something they wanted to achieve. And in Poland, there are quite a lot of people who, for example, who were part of the former anti-communist opposition who weren't as famous or as prominent in post-communist Poland as they thought they should be. They weren't best-selling authors, or they were architects in one case, and nobody wanted to build their buildings. There was a sort of resentment. That was very often part of it. Or a sense that their group or their ideas, some of them were Catholics, some of them were religious, and they felt that as Poland became more secular, and as their encounter with Europe revealed to them that Europe was very secular, because they'd had this romantic idea of European civilization. They were going to rejoin it, and for a lot of them, there was a kind of culture shock. It wasn't what they expected, and so they became defensive about their culture and their background, and wanting to defend that. And there was a third thing which I couldn't really write about because I can't prove it, and it's a very touchy subject. But in a number of cases, among my former friends, a lot of it had to do with their children. So their children, you have to imagine Poles in 1989 were rejoining Europe. That's fantastic. One of the things that happened when they rejoined Europe is that lots of teenagers went to study abroad. So they went abroad, and then they never came back. They went to Paris, or they went to London, or they went to...
Well, especially they could work anywhere.
They could work anywhere. The borders disappeared. It was all fantastic. Right. They learned foreign languages. We all thought it was great to learn foreign languages, and kids went away. And in one case, a couple of interesting cases, they went away. Some of them, married foreigners and stayed abroad. And in one or two cases, and this is, again, very delicate, I can't prove it, I can't name names, one or two of them had children who turned out to be gay. Mm-hmm. And this seems to have been also a kind of, the West has stolen my children, or Europe has stolen my children. And this was something that seems to have turned some people against the new system. I mean, I don't want to be over general. I don't want to generalize from a couple of people
what's so hard? What's so hard to understand is Poland has one of the fastest growing economies.
Oh yeah, this is not a story of these are not economically left behind people. This is not the forgotten working class. This is not
the deplorables.
This is not the deplorables.
They don't have the immigrants or refugees.
There are no immigrants. There are no refugees. There was no actual issue. There
was the plane crash.
Right. So there was another issue in Poland. This I've always found very hard to describe because it's so particular to Poland. But we had a very odd political incident in 2010, which is that an airplane carrying the president and his entourage and some leading generals and military people crashed in Russia. They were on their way to visit a famous burial site of Poles who'd been murdered by the Soviet Union during the war. It was meant to be the beginning of the president's election campaign. The plane crashed. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, there was almost a kind of, one national, it was a little bit like 9/11 in this country. Everybody was in mourning, and there was a kind of national feeling, this is so terrible. And actually the Russians made a lot of gestures to Poles at that time, and the Russian prime minister came to the funeral and so of one of the funerals of the president and so on. Pretty soon after that, the leader of this Law and Justice Party, which is in Poland, the sort of far-right nationalist, nativist party, either because that's instinctively how he thinks or because he's extremely cynical, decided to make use of the burgeoning conspiracy theories about this crash. And he pushed them. The crash was planned by the Russians, or it was planned in conjunction with the then Polish government. And he pushed this as an idea, and he repeated it, and he began holding monthly rituals where he would give a speech, and he would say, "We will get to the bottom of the truth. We will find the truth to this crisis." And this functioned a little bit the way birtherism functioned here.
Mm-hmm. Or 9/11 being a hoax.
But birtherism even more, because birtherism was something that we didn't take seriously. We thought this is just a bunch of nutcases who really believes that stuff. Actually, 30% of the country believed it. And this is a little bit like what happened in Poland. So you had this myth that began to knit people together who, for other reasons, were dissatisfied. And it was a kind of story about the hidden truth. We don't really know what's happening. Things are being hidden from us and are being concealed. And this appealed to a lot of people.
Well, it's funny because this is, as you say, it's across 3 continents. And in each case, or sorry, 2 continents.
Hey, we can call
3
Britain
countries.
its own continent at this point.
Yes, exactly. And yet it feels like the same virus, but it's given different names and different causes in each. So here it's the forgotten working class. In England, it's the people who feel their country is being overrun by foreigners and EU bureaucrats. And in Poland, as you pointed out, there wasn't any of the same factors there. I mean, it was almost like the virus in its perfect form.
I know. And in Poland, we didn't have any tribes, so we invented them. I mean, it's almost like you have 2 nations in Poland.
And, although you found the Jews, which is traditional. they're always...
Although there aren't enough of them, really, to make any kind of, to be, to be influential. So it's really, it's almost as if in Poland you have
There doesn't need to be many of them, Anne. Just needs to be one, and his last name is Soros.
Right. Although the Soros thing, it's funny, didn't catch on in Poland until very, very recently. Right. I mean, I think it's almost a reflection of what's going on in the United States. The Poles pick up a lot of alt-right and far-right rhetoric here. But
that's the thing. So you have this, let's call it a virus. And you said actually, at root, though, there is something similar in that it's people who are angry with the changes that have come over their country. And I guess that's always true with every generation. Someone is mad. But you felt it was, as you said, and I think this describes this, it's this anti-elite revulsion, really, that the elites, so-called, have screwed up. And you said it represents the end of hateful notions of meritocracy and competition, principles that by definition never benefited the less successful. And then you said, scarily, given the right conditions, any society can turn against democracy. Indeed, if history is anything to go by, all societies eventually will. So it's like it's a politics of resentment. It's a politics of not just people who have been left behind, but people less capable. The new meritocracy of the digital age, perhaps.
The people who, for whatever reason, aren't succeeding in the system or fear they can't succeed in it because the rules, they're not winning according to the existing rules. And one of the things that we forget is that our systems really put competition at the heart of everything. So who gets to rule? Who's in charge? Who runs the country? Who gets to be rich? It's the people who run the best businesses. Who gets to be in politics? The people who win elections.
It's all those damn Ivy Leaguers.
Who gets to be civil servants? It's the people who are good at passing exams.
Yeah. Or maybe they've never been more displaced now with the global economy. Right? Like that's had a escalating factor.
Or people who do well, or, in Poland, people who speak English and who are good at dealing with foreigners tend to do better than people who don't. So people who don't speak English resent people who do. I mean, there's actually an undertone of that. So there's so whatever it is that the rules are, there are some people who aren't winning according to those rules, and therefore they would like to change the system. And this is more or less what's happened in Poland. So there's a group of people who didn't like the rules of liberal democracy. Right. And when they came to power, and it's a long story how that happened, but they did, they began to change the rules. And so they started with the judiciary, and they tried to undermine its independence, possibly with the idea eventually to manipulating elections and gerrymandering and so on. They took over this state television, which is what used to be quite important in Poland, and they made it. I mean, literally, it's kind of ruling party propaganda. It's like nothing anybody had seen in 30 years. And they also the other important thing they did is they politicized the civil service. So they changed the civil service laws and the laws on diplomats, and they kicked out all the people who were qualified according to the rules of meritocracy. They loosened the requirements so that they could appoint their cousins, and they started you've had this wave of nepotism. Just
listening to you, I can sort of understand. So you've got people who are bitter, and someone comes along and promises them rapid change, and that's very attractive. And the thing about these sorts of accounts of society, they're very simple, overly simplistic, and sometimes romantic, and people get carried away. But I've read recently that there's a bit of a turnaround in Poland. There has. And there were all these elections in municipalities, and it looks like the Law and Justice Party is losing. Now, are they going to be ruthless enough not to allow themselves to lose?
This is what we don't know. Okay. I mean, so to be clear, democracy hasn't ended in Poland. I mean, it still exists. It's been you have to imagine it's as if 50% of, well, actually, we're not that far off it. I was going to say 50% of all television is controlled by the state and dictated by the state, and the judicial systems in the independence has been undermined, and various blows have been dealt to the system. It's still so far intact. We'll see what happens. I mean, there's now hints that they want to really take aim at the private media. They will call up proprietors of newspapers and of radio stations, for example. I know of one in specific, and they will say, one in particular, and they'll say, okay, if you don't, we're going to make sure nobody advertises on your radio station, so you'd better sell it, and you'd better sell it to someone who we tell you to sell it to.
They're still doing that?
They are still doing that. But the point is they haven't yet succeeded. There is a pushback. There are people organizing to fight back against it, and maybe they'll win. I mean, I think Poland, it's still an open question. But these kinds of, but the point of the article was really that these patterns, the ways in which you can undermine liberal democracy you can see being repeated in other places, including in this country.
And that's what I want to talk about too. That I think one of my takeaways from the recent midterms was you had this sense that the night before everybody was going out to vote, and we've had enough, and we're done with this, and we're going to take back some control, so there's some brakes on the system. And it wasn't that, the Democrats got the House, but then there was gains in the Senate for Republicans. And you just felt that there is now this, whatever the base is, 30%, 33%, where whatever the president does, they're going to go along with, and we could be facing now a constitutional crisis. And they're for this. And the other balance is up in arms, but I've never seen it quite so divided. And I guess it has been, the two sides have been entrenched, but I've never seen it this extreme.
What Trump did is something similar to what Kaczynski, who's the leader of this right-wing party, this far-right party in Poland, did, is he's created through this use of mythology and fantasy, he's created a kind of community of believers that has almost a religious quality to it. It started with birtherism. You believe in this story about Obama's birth certificate. And more recently, what he did during the election was he created this fantasy about the caravan. I mean, we now remember that. The caravan is a bunch of poor people, less in number every day, who are 1,000 miles away in Mexico. Nevertheless, he sent the U.S. Army to the border to fight them, which was pretty unprecedented. I mean, I seem to remember that people in Texas got nervous even when there were exercises, and the Army was just practicing stuff in Texas, and they got worried about the federal government coming to take them over, and yet people seem to be happy to send the army to the border to fight nobody.
But don't you think?
This is a creation of a fantasy. In order to believe it, you have to suspend some belief.
Well, the attacks on the free press.
Yeah. Well, that's another piece of it. So, but once you begin to suspend reality, and this is one of the things I describe in the piece, and once people have become accustomed to that, then you can use it for other things. I mean, in my view, Trump is doing this because he's expecting either it's going to be from the Mueller investigation, or it may be from the Democratic House asking for his tax returns. Trump is aware that he needs to break the system. He needs to convince people that the press is lying and that Democrats are lying because he needs to offer an alternative version of reality. And so he wants this community of believers to stand by him. And they've already shown that they can be persuaded by a fantasy, and now he'll drag them along to the next one.
Just to defend the deplorables, I guess, the caravan, maybe for people, is a symbol of the chaos of our immigration policy. And it reminded them that on the other extreme, you have many Democrats who seem to, want open immigration.
Very few. Very few.
But what do they offer?
Obama enforced the border. He sent guards down to deport people.
Things have changed since then. The left, the Democratic Party is not the party of Obama.
I don't know. There were Democrat. I was just reading. I mean, there was a Democrat running for Senate in Missouri,
Claire McCaskill.
Yeah, and she
at the last minute when she knew she was losing, she endorsed the stricter
but she all the way, she was anti-immigration all the way through. And then when she saw how powerful the caravan myth was, she started talking about the caravan. And it had actually no impact at all because people will believe what they're going to believe. And they believe that, that Democrats, want to undermine the country by allowing an invasion of foreigners. But the point is a different one. I mean, I don't know if you want to discuss the merits of the caravan, but something like 600,000 people a year come into the United States, overstay their visas, and become illegal immigrants. That's how most people become illegal immigrants. There is not an invasion of people coming over the border. That's a myth. And so,
I'm not saying it's not a myth. I agree, but nevertheless, there's a certain amount of anarchy.
Well, no, it's an attempt to weaponize. I think what you're saying is there is a legitimate debate to be had about immigration.
Sure.
And in fact, in a way, weaponizing the caravan to play to the worst instincts of people's fears, rather than putting forth a really, reform immigration package from a Republican viewpoint. That has not happened, and in a way, you've killed any chances of it happening because you are playing the politics of resentment.
Yeah, but it's not just the politics of resentment, it's also the creation of fictions,
right.
The creation of stories that people can take part in and that they feel empowered by. And maybe they feel empowered by, as you say, because it's some kind of trope, we were being invaded by brown-colored foreigners or whatever it is. Maybe there's some deeper reasons for it. But nevertheless, the creation of this imaginary community is a very powerful thing, and I've seen it happen in more than one country, as I say.
But just to continue, there is a dangerous populism on the right, but there's one on the left as well. And it's more alive in universities and increasingly in the media where...
Would you call it populism?
I would
on the
say,
left?
well, I would say that it is, yes, because it's all about, it's very tribalistic and pitting groups against one another. It has a common enemy. It has a conspiracy theory. And
it's the same phenomenon on the left. As it happens, we don't have a left wing in Poland. There is no left of any kind.
Really? That's what you need.
There's no left. No,
there's no left. The communism killed them off. But no, I mean, so the phenomenon that I'm describing doesn't have to be a right-wing phenomenon. It can also be a left-wing phenomenon. Actually, in England, in Britain, there's a cult-like left centered around Jeremy Corbyn, who's the Labour leader.
He's a perfect example, actually.
You can see it, as you say, in universities and other places in this country too. I'm not describing a phenomenon that needs to be, so-called right wing.
Well, you said it really well. You said in the article, I'll quote you said, if you are someone who believes that you deserve to rule, then your motivation to attack the elite, pack the courts, and warp the press to achieve your ambitions is strong. Resentment, envy, and above all, the belief that the system is unfair, which is what we hear from the left and the right. These are important sentiments, you say, among the intellectuals of the Polish right, but I think that underlies all of these different
Sure. So
movements.
that's the sense in which they're anti-democratic, and the reason why they're anti-democratic is they think the system is wrong. It's what Lenin used to call bourgeois liberalism, which he made fun of. The system is weak. Liberalism is mushy-mushy. And the right thinks that it has a stronger narrative, and the left thinks that it has a stronger narrative. I mean, we've sort of seen this story before.
So that's why I think we need an empowered center. And it may not be true in Poland because you don't have a left threatening you, but we do. And so I think as the wackier the left gets, the more people drift to the right. And what we need is
Well, you have Russia.
We have Russia. We have
That's
well, it depends.
we have all kinds of other issues. Yeah.
Well, just before we leave this topic, because I do want to get back to friendship.
Yeah. But this is so serious.
Yeah, we're so serious. I think it's the vodka.
But you know what? Let's have the champagne.
Yeah, open the champagne. Okay. Just to go back, comparing what you've seen in England and in Poland, it seems so unfamiliar for us to have these divides in the United States. That the American always, I think, sees themselves as a little isolated, a little more immune to these types of viral infections that, what is your take on it? Is this, I mean, there have obviously been terrible periods in American history and
we had
Civil War.
We had the Civil War. Funny enough, just last night, coincidentally, I was staying at the Union League Club in Philadelphia, which is a club that was founded in 1862.
Very well-dressed women with great hair.
That's right, absolutely.
Lots of pearls.
Yep, lots of pearls. But someone told me the history of the Union Club.
Hang on.
No, don't hang on. I got something out of my purse. Okay, it's acceptable.
A mint. If you have a mint in your mouth,
I don't.
Christina.
I don't.
Oh, Christine has a mint.
Anyway,
please go on.
Anyway, they told me the story of the Union League Club. The Union League Club was founded because there used to be another club called the Philadelphia Club, and lots of people, wealthy people in Philadelphia at that time, had big investments in the South. They owned plantations or they were traded with them. And the pro and anti-slavery factions inside the Philadelphia Club, which was the fancy club of Philadelphia in the 19th century, were so fierce and everybody was so angry that there were fistfights in the fanciest club in Philadelphia. And the pro-union group left the club and started their own club, which was the Union League Club. And of course, that reminded me very much of the present. So these were people who were friends and who stopped speaking to each other. And of course, unfortunately, that problem wasn't resolved until after the Civil War. But we have had this before. We just haven't had it. We haven't had it in recent memory, and we aren't used to it. I mean, other democracies are used to it.
I think that I'm just a little older than you two.
Not much.
I lived through the Vietnam War, and not the early part.
You don't remember that.
And our cities were being burned.
Yeah. Assassinations.
All sorts of things were going on. The country felt very divided and angry. But I don't know. Somehow this does seem worse, even though I was a protester then.
Yeah, no. The issue is when people begin to question the system itself. Like, do we really want to vote for do we want fair voting system? Do we want in an equal playing field? Do we want the political parties to be able to compete evenly? Do we want there to be, at least in theory, some kind of objective press? Do we want, in theory, there to be some kind of neutral civil service? Do we believe that kind of thing can exist? And when we stop believing that.
Well, I believe in that, and that's why I don't want populism at either side. And we just saw a debate between Steve Bannon and
some guy named David Frum.
And Bannon kept saying, the future belongs either to the populist left or the populist right. And I'm just thinking, no, it doesn't. It's not going to happen.
Well, that guy named David Frum, I think I could say objectively he wiped the floor with Stephen Bannon.
He did.
And you personally, I want to now get a little bit to you because you're also our great friend. And as I joke with Christina and others, like, here you have this really great girlfriend and you go shopping with her and we have lunch and we drink wine and then she turns out to be Solzhenitsyn. She turns out to be one of the most, not just amazing people of your time, but and your work is going to go down in history. You are doing crazy important work.
She won a Pulitzer-prize, which, to have your friend win that, it's not
you
easy.
look at her Wikipedia and she's
don't go there.
Don't go there. It's like all these awards. It's like...
Anyway. And she has 2 children
who are brilliant
and
handsome.
She has it all,
and they play polo.
We're told you can't do it, and she did it. So she's kind of.
But I want to talk about her personal life because first of all, no. Oh, how could we be mean? So I want to talk a little bit personally now about being a woman, just something you love to talk about.
As you all know, it's my favorite subject.
Let's talk about your marriage to Roddick, the dashing Roddick, that you, as this nice Jewish girl of Washington, D.C., big academic, big star at Yale, you fall for this swashbuckling Solidarność agitator.
Oxford educated,
who was in exile.
In other words, what did your mother say?
Exactly.
I'm going to marry him, Mom.
Right. So you've presumably already discussed him. Yes, he's a Polish politician now, but he wasn't when I met him. Although I had several very funny conversations with people in London. I remember a few years after marrying Roddick, and somebody said to me, what I don't understand is how you met and married the Polish defense minister. And the answer is he wasn't the Polish defense minister when I met him. I mean, he was a journalist. No, so yeah, I mean, my mother, it feels mean to bring my mother into it. They were never against it. They were a little surprised.
One of my favorite stories, which I only recently heard when Roddick was coming through. You guys come through sometimes at different times in Washington, but somehow you always end up through our house, which is wonderful. And Roddick was there, and for some reason, we were talking about his first encounter, or one of his first encounters with your dad. And he was sitting in the house with your father, and he sensed that your father was not, maybe fully on board with this. And it was a little awkward. And he had a friend there who was like the football commissioner. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Big deal.
Paul Tagliabue. Yes.
They were talking sports, and Roddick, like my husband, has no interest in sport. Politics is their sports. They do not follow regular sports. So finally, Roddick sat quietly, unusual for Roddick, and I guess your father turned to him and he said, Roddick, do you follow sports? What's your favorite sport? And Roddick said, dwarf tossing.
Yes.
It had just been in the news in Australia. There are these dwarfs like fighting to retain it, and it was being seen as cruel. But the first thing that came out of his mouth was
it went down really badly.
That won your father over.
Yeah.
If somebody said that, if my future son-in-law said that, we would be friends for life after that.
Right. No,
so
there were
funny.
some culture clashes. One of them was over sports. My husband does not watch sports, and my father does. There were just also kind of ways of having conversations at a dinner table. My husband can be very kind of arch and sarcastic and ironic, and he can say things in a very deadpan way.
Is that a Polish thing or a Roddick thing?
I think it's Roddick. Maybe he picked it up in England. I don't know. But his father was a little bit like that too. Or he can tell off-putting jokes, for example.
He's gotten
Funny jokes.
He's gotten in a little bit of trouble for
and he gets in trouble for
There's
it too.
two great
sometimes.
jokes.
And my parents aren't used to that form of conversation or banter at all, and so that sometimes put them off. He's actually a little bit better than he used to be. Years of being a diplomat and having to go to boring dinner parties has kind of polished him a little bit, and he's now much more conscious of who he's offending and so on than he was when he was 25. But
so as you said, he wasn't yet Polish defense minister.
No, he was a journalist,
and
I was.
And you met on the Berlin. You met the night. Tell the story
on the Berlin Wall.
Story.
Yeah, that's the myth. Actually, it was a little more.
I like the myth.
That's the myth that we tell.
Well, that's where you fell in love.
We did meet before that. So, one of the funny things that one forgets as one gets older is when you're in your late 20s and when you're all doing the same thing, we were journalists, Roddick didn't feel like he came from anything that was different from me. We were just journalists. He was writing for British newspapers. I was writing for British newspapers.
You were both reporting eagerly on the same cause.
We were both reporting eagerly on the same topic. We were both excited about writing about the fall of communism. It felt like we were doing more or less thing. It was only years later it occurred to me that I'd married a crazy foreigner. It didn't seem like that initially. Yeah. But no, we'd met earlier. He came to Poland, actually he'd left Poland in 1980 and wound up staying abroad when there was martial law, and then he came back in 1989 when he could. But he was there. I met him a couple of times, and then he went away and came back. And he came back on the day before the wall fell, and we met at a press conference in Warsaw. And we met at the press conference, and the next day we went back to this press center where the German Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, was supposed to be coming. And, of course, the wall had fallen overnight, and Kohl had canceled his trip. So we said, well, this is boring. Nobody cares about Warsaw anymore. Let's drive to Berlin. So Roddick and me and another Polish friend of ours then got in my very small Korean car, as it then was.
Not a deux chevaux, not one of those little
It was a
French
Daihatsu. And we drove from Warsaw to Berlin. And at that time, there were no highways. There were just these 2-lane roads, basically. And there was also you had to bring petrol in cans because...
Can we thank the EU for this, please?
We can thank the EU for fixing the roads, yeah. You had to bring petrol in cans. And so we filled up the car with petrol and with gas, and we drove to the border. And, it was a very long drive. And by the time we got there, it was the middle of the night. And we actually, of course, this is pre-internet, so we didn't have... Google Maps. And we were literally just driving west from Warsaw. And we got to Berlin and we just drove straight and we arrived at the wall. And we arrived at Checkpoint Charlie, which was the checkpoint in the middle of the city. Mm-hmm. And we got to the checkpoint, and this was not a checkpoint.
Famous checkpoint.
Checkpoint that you weren't supposed to, it was a army crossing, not for civilians. But we got there, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the guard said, "You can't cross here." And we started shouting, "No, the wall's down. All these rules are stupid. Let us through." And he was like, "Oh, all right." And we drove through. We literally drove up to the Brandenburg Gate, parked our car there, and got on the wall.
And you climbed it.
And we climbed on the wall. And the extraordinary thing was that what nobody remembers is this was actually 24 hours after it had been opened. But there were hundreds of people out in the middle of the night, thousands of people. But nobody really knew what to do. And people were...
No, we're on the wall.
People were sitting on the wall, but but the East German guards were still standing in the no man's land next to the wall.
Armed, presumably.
Armed.
Yeah.
And people started teasing the guards and kind of jumping off the wall from the west into the east and then shouting at the guard. And then the guards would kind of come over and throw them back over the wall. And it was a very odd, weird atmosphere. And years later, I met a German historian who had seen the records of the Politburo meeting, that was going on 500 yards from there, that night. And he said, yeah, they were talking about should we be shooting people at the Brandenburg Gate? There's all this chaos. And of course, they didn't shoot them. And anyway, it ended happily, and I eventually got married to Radek about a year or two later, I think. And we did actually go back to Berlin on the 25th anniversary. Radek was at that time the Speaker of the Polish Parliament, and the Speaker of the German Parliament, who knew this story, invited us to come to the 25th anniversary ceremonies, which was odd. I mean, we stayed in a really nice hotel and we walked around Berlin and, felt very old. And, and of course, Berlin is totally transformed.
Yes.
And everything's different.
What was the thing that appealed to you most about this crazy foreigner? Because you're very serious. But Radek, as serious and incredibly smart as he is, he really is the life of the party. Is that like part of the attraction, or what was the you nice Jewish girl from D.C.?
Opposites attract. I don't know.
But it was just such an exciting time, and you were together to be Wordsworth, to be young and alive. And
so this is maybe the strand of that story that connects us back to the present. We were so confident about 1989. First of all, it was so fun. I mean, somebody pointed out to me recently that most stories that journalists cover, big stories, are awful. Like, what are the big stories? 9/11, I don't know, the war in Iraq. These are the big, marquee front page
hurricanes,
stories. Hurricanes, famines. This was not only the huge story, but it was fun and it was optimistic and everything was changing and it was all going to get better. And the demonstrations were happy, and exciting. And this was the feeling I was trying to show in this Atlantic story, and we were also convinced that we'd found, that we were going to be liberal Democrats and Europe was going to be whole and everybody was going to be more prosperous and we were one civilization again.
End of history. Everything was, we're all done.
Really, but that people joke now about that phrase that Fukuyama used, but actually it really felt like that. Like we have got it. We've figured out what the best political system is. We're all going to be part of it. And that is why the events of the last couple of years have, for me, been so hard to explain and analyze. This is why it was that I found this article so difficult to write. It was actually originally it started out as a different article. It was going to be about one of the things the article describes as two brothers.
Right.
One of them is the editor of the main kind of liberal newspaper in Poland, and the other runs sort of the really nasty state television. And so how did these two people become so different? And I started out writing about them, and then eventually I realized, I can't tell this story unless I start, with myself and with this great optimism and this feeling and this, because I couldn't explain why the antagonism was so great, unless I also explained why the optimism had been so great a quarter century earlier. It's
also, and we were in that same coterie because David was writing in Canada. That's where we were. And you also felt it was part of the Reagan moment where you were an intellectual minority in your countries. Like, I remember the left here was very strong, as the hippies getting older, the baby boomers.
Are you looking at me?
No, I did actually. Sorry, that was not personal, darling. Okay. But there was like that too, and then there were these absolute intellectual heroes, many from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel, who were fighting this dwindling but still powerful ideological state. And so when that happened, I mean, I just remember how anti-Reagan the majority was. Just as people complain that, Hollywood stars are against Trump, that it felt that way against Reagan. There was a lot of vitriol, and it wasn't fashionable to support this vision, this future. So when that happened, there was also that wonderful heady feeling of vindication and vindication in the best way that freedom had come to these places. Democracy was triumphing. Yep. Democracy was on the march.
Yep. But I think this is part of the problem with the right. At least it's so what happened in the U.S. and the U.K. and where you had this parallel thing with Thatcherism is that the right and my article is really about intellectuals. It's not about everybody. It's about my particular group of friends who were journalists and so on. Because having had this experience of being quite radical or feeling yourselves to be radical and of being right, history's on our side, what she was saying. For a lot of people, 10, 15 years later, life began to seem rather flat. Okay, we achieved everything. What's the next battle to fight? What's the next, radical cause to take up? And so for a lot of people, that is when the right began to fracture. And in Poland, for example, it fractured between people like, okay, now we won. Let's build the country. Let's build highways. Let's create a stock market. And then for some people, that was never enough. It was like, that's boring. We need to keep pushing. And the part of the right, continued to want to do more radical and more extreme things. And that was the beginning of the split, I think.
Maybe the femsplainers will accept this because I have always wanted to patent a law. And the law I originally called it the law of happy surprises. And a friend of mine said, that sounds trivial.
I love it. I want it law already.
The law of fortuitous reversals for serious people. But here's my guess, based on hope, that things will turn around in Poland. And Poland has
I thought you were going to say here.
I'm getting to here.
Okay. Geez, that was a real letdown.
Wait.
I'm happy for Poland.
Here.
Okay.
They will turn around in Poland. And Poland is this heroic country that led this liberation movement and helped to bring down the Soviet Empire. And I think it's going to survive this and then be stronger. And I think the same is going to be in the United States because we know too much, we're aware of too much, and fanaticism doesn't work. It will work for a while. It's emotionally quite satisfying to be a radical.
To be angry.
To be angry leftist and angry right. But it doesn't build buildings. It doesn't build roads. It doesn't cure diseases. For that, you do need experts. You need the rule of law. You need you need a market economy. That's what you need. And it just seems to me that with the knowledge that we have, it's human nature. People will drift back to it. And if you look at the overall sweep of history and compare just the amount of chaos and destruction in the world right now, it's diminishing.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've seen the darkest side. I was going to ask one of my questions for you, Anne, was you are drawn to the dark side.
But do you endorse the law
do you
of
endorse
reversals?
Berlin Wall? I'm terrified. I don't want to ask Anne if there's hope because I know she's going to say there's no hope. And then if I ask Roddick, he'd say there's hope.
That's one of the reasons I like Roddick.
Exactly,
He's a kind of nature's optimist.
He really is.
He will be back in office. Now, I don't know if that's happy.
I don't know if that's happy either, so don't wish it on me.
I don't wish it. I wish it on us.
Because I want to hear, before you go, I know we're running out of time, but I do want to hear about you. Don't notice how you sidestep the woman question. I want to talk to you about being that political wife while being an intellectual, but maybe not. Okay, but
no, we can
go
talk
on.
about it. We can talk about it.
Okay, just hopeful, not hopeful to Christina's question.
So I'm kind of on the fence. I mean, one of the reasons why history is so exciting and why politics are so exciting is you actually don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, in Poland, I can see a scenario where not only you could have a reversal and you could have a return to liberal democracy, you could have that turn out to be something that's very influential.
Exactly.
On other European countries, this kind of return of
because it'll
very
be more
inspirational.
prosperous. It'll be more
Yeah,
And it was prosperous.
the other alternative is that it gets crushed, and then we're all gloomy. But but let's hope it's the first.
What about the states? Do you feel positive, negative? Do you think we can?
So the states so we're lucky in one way that Poland is a much smaller and much more centralized country, and the government can do a lot more damage. And for example, taking over state television was a big deal. We don't even have state television, so
we have PBS.
We have PBS, right? Exactly.
We have NPR.
My point. Exactly. My point exactly.
There you go.
but we have we have politics thriving on the state level. The politics of California and Arizona and Texas and Vermont, are all really different. And you don't have the ability. Washington doesn't actually shape that much. So the possibility of revival in the United States, I think, lies in our size and in our huge variety. So, so that and in a way, national politics are so awful here, but I don't know that all local politics or state politics are awful. I mean, if you followed any of the elections in the midterms, some of them were really interesting. You had quite, intelligent debates between people. You had a lot of people really engaged in politics in positive ways. The view from the ground doesn't look as bad as the view from high up. It's sort of Washington politics, national television, cable television. That seems.
And I think it's also made worse for those of us who are on Twitter. You get the worst.
We'll get to your Twitter habit.
Twitter
My
is the
Twitter
worst.
No, she has one too.
I know, it's terrible.
And so does people a lot of people
A lot of people I know.
I think that it makes you have a much more distorted and grim view of the society if you're on Twitter.
All right, quickly, just to go back, because I remember it, just so people understand what you went through. Because I'm trying to be hopeful about, and I'm also reminded just listening to you and of course reading any history, things are never easy. Like you get a figure like Trump, and forget him. Just everything that we're living through right now of the anger and the upset. That it's not easy to fix. It doesn't just happen like that. And maybe that's an American idea, North American idea. That
it's
you have
an
a problem,
internet idea.
You fix it.
Internet,
it's done.
We all want instant.
No, it's a process. It's going to be it's a process.
It's going to take a while.
And we have to be tested, and we have to fight for the things we believe, and that's not a bad thing.
I also think there are probably there are anachronisms in our democracy. There are issues about the way things work. It does seem a little creaky. It may be that it needs some big reforms.
Right. So the question, reform versus smashing it up.
Don't tell me you want to abolish the Electoral College. Because that could come.
Okay, I'm stopping this debate right now.
A problem with our dinner parties.
What did I say? Women, wife, women. So just last thing before you go. So you marry this dashing fellow. He becomes this, ruler. He runs for president. And you become... I don't want to say the Hillary Clinton of Poland because you are
Jackie Kennedy.
The Jackie Kennedy, thank you.
No, I was.
But you were
sidelined myself.
But you were. I mean, the Poles have a very mixed view of you because on the one hand, they're incredibly proud that here is this woman who has adopted our country and is a Pulitzer-prize winning historian and married to our esteemed defense minister at the time, and then. People who really this smart American Jewess. What is she doing here? Like you took a lot of anti-Semitism. You took.
Well, it wasn't so much anti-Semitism. It was conspiratorial. That there was after this far right government won, there was a whole series of articles. Was a whole series of articles.
Was Radek running for president at that point?
No.
Okay, but he did run for president.
This was a brief episode,
right,
10 years ago.
Right.
No,
seems yesterday.
No, it was a really long time ago. Yeah. So it has nothing to do with the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. After they won, there was and after they began their assault on the judiciary and so on, there began to be a lot of bad articles about Poland in the Western press, which just basically had never happened before because Poland was the darling child of the West, and everything was going really well, and there was no bad press about Poland for 20 years, and there started to be, and they needed to explain this. Why was there so much bad press about Poland?
They blamed you.
They blamed me. Anne Applebaum is secretly organizing the international press against us. And it's her secret contacts at the New York Times and Le Monde and Süddeutsche Zeitung, and she's organizing it and she's making it all happen. And that was literally, there were several articles more or less along those lines.
Süddeutsche.
Do you ever have a Washington?
That so well.
The Washington reaction is to not want to deny it, because then you'd have to deny that you're all powerful.
Ruddock kept saying, just take credit for it. Just say, yes, you're in charge. I organize everything.
Scare people. Like, actually, I noted, sir, you're on my list now.
Exactly.
Make use of the power. But.
Exactly. No, frankly, the views towards me now, which used to be sort of vague and they weren't that well formed, are polarized. So when my book came out in Poland recently, I got really big crowds at my book events, and people were excited about it. And
this is in Poland.
In Poland.
And you get demonstrators?
No demonstrators. But
Antifa doesn't show up?
No,
I'm kidding.
That's for you, Christina.
I know.
I love you.
Sorry. No, and people couldn't be more friendly.
Right.
And at the same time, then I have these nasty attacks on me in the right-wing press, including, they put me on the cover of their nasty magazines with headlines about Anne Applebaum, as I said, secret enemy of Poland. So you get both.
How do you personally take that? How do you personally deal with that?
It's funny. It used to bother me. And then at some point, particularly when I worked out how much of it was orchestrated and animated,
right.
I began trying, particularly when I understood, particularly online,
right.
when I worked out that some of it was just computer bots, repeating the same thing over and over again. At some point, I just said, to hell with it. It just doesn't bother me anymore. And I actually don't, genuinely, I sort of can look, I ask myself, do I care? And the answer is, I don't care.
What about when you describe
I don't
the
care,
article,
and I'm not afraid.
The person, the people who personally, like
my ex-friends,
cross the street.
I don't really see them. Mm-hmm. I'm not in the same place that they are, and I don't see them. And I'm sure I would find a way to be polite to them if I did. But so the Brexit, post-Brexit dinner party in London, this is what you do if you have a mixed party.
And
I am unusual in that I have friends on both sides of
right.
that divide,
right.
just because of who my friends were in London for years. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people go in one camp or the other, and they're not used to meeting people who are on the other side. And so if you bring them together at the same dining table, it can get awkward. So you just have to say in advance, we're not talking about this.
Yeah. That's a good idea. Just put it out with the invitation. And by the way,
no Brexit.
Yeah, we're going to play Clue.
I'm not agreeing to that rule.
Monopoly.
Later tonight, it's all Brexit. And I have strong views.
Yeah, we're going out with Anne for dinner. All right, Anne, thank you so much for coming by. Longed to have you on.
I've longed to be on your great podcast, which I listen to, avidly.
Oh, thank you. And we don't have to ask you your cocktail because we know it. We're going to put the infused vodka recipe from
that you and I made.
I do have one short story about that infused drink that we had, because if you remember when we were photographing the cookbook in your beautiful house.
I remember.
And then every night we'd have this spectacular dinner because we had to make all the dishes.
We had to make the food, exactly.
Right. And then we'd serve it that night to our families who were there. And then after dinner one night, you poured me one glass of, I didn't even know it was infused. It was hooch. It was like Polish hooch, but, it was like home crafted and things. And you poured it. And the next thing I knew, it was 2 a.m. The lights had all been turned out, and I was lying on your sofa.
Were you fully clothed?
I was fully clothed.
Well, that's a relief.
Apparently, Roddick had come down and not seen me because you have these high-back sofas, and I just toppled over. Yeah. I don't know why David didn't look for me, but anyway, and there I was.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid. I think I even remember this. This was infused vodka made by some friends of ours.
Oh yeah, it had I don't know
cherry vodka. Yeah,
I would not.
Vishnyovka.
Somebody poured that in a bar, you'd be in trouble.
Yeah, it's probably illegal.
Cover your drink as a woman.
Where can I get it?
All right, thank you, Anne.
There's a recipe in our book.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Make
Check out the cookbook.
Thank you.
Well, that was exhilarating.
Yeah, I'm so glad we're going to see her later because actually she's here all weekend, so we can have a lot of fun. A lot of fun. So we have some listener feedback for this week. We don't have a lot of time. We went long with Anne. Worth it. Zoe, what have you got?
People had a very positive reaction to Christina's food phobias.
Why? Making fun of me?
She's a toddler.
I'm not.
You're a toddler.
Lots of people thought you were very relatable. A lot of people said, "Oh, I know the same thing. That's adorable."
I don't have food phobias, okay? But I don't like most fish. And I don't like cauliflower or Brussels sprouts, but who does?
Okay, you didn't join us on this meal in Toronto. So we went out with David's sister and
what did they serve? It sounded like a nightmare.
Well, my daughter Miranda said the same thing. It was at one of these tasting menus where they bring you like 8 or 9 courses. They bring you wine pairings, so you would have been fine on the
wine and the bread and the butter.
But they bring and Miranda, who shares some of your food phobias, said the problem with these food tastings, they are her worst nightmare of a meal because it's going to be something like eel and sea urchin foam. Like that's what it's going to be. So I was thinking, Miranda, you're maybe overreacting to this. So we went to this incredible restaurant in Toronto because Toronto is this great food scene. And the first, I'm not joking, the first dish was called ice creamed eel.
Okay, I'm already hyperventilating.
You know what? It was really good.
Oh God!
No, it was like it was like a very creamy, beautiful pate that was not too fishy.
I just couldn't. No, because an eel isn't only.
You know what? They're weirdly delicious.
Worm.
No, you can't think of what it looks like. They're weirdly delicious.
I'm not interested.
No, I had a cousin that had a food phobia where she would only eat orange things.
Okay, that's not a food phobia. That's
crazy. I don't know what. She would only eat mac and cheese and chicken nuggets.
That's now we're sub-toddler. We're like
sub-toddler.
We're sub-toddler.
No, I eat a lot of sophisticated things, but what I wouldn't want eel ice cream. Oh, that's
no, it wasn't eel ice creamed. It was called ice creamed eel.
Well, eel ice cream. Go on. What was the next thing?
Somebody, the handle was @MageRion, said in response to your food phobias, at least Christina has the right views on the evils of pineapple on pizza, and that's what's important.
Well, who has any views on that? I would never eat that.
See, Canadians like that, though.
I know. Okay,
I love it.
Is it a Canadian thing?
Well, I think it's the ham is the Canadian bacon, right?
Right.
And so they like to put that on pizza instead of pepperoni.
Right.
And I think it's just a combination that's universal.
Okay, I remember being a teenager, and maybe I had the munchies. I'm not going to comment on when I ate pizza with
a lot
pineapple.
of people in Canada have the munchies
so
right now. That's
exactly.
For sure.
Yeah, the air. Remember, you step outside and you go, oh, the Canadian air, it smells like pot because it's been legalized. But no, I have to say I'm kind of partial to pizza with pineapple.
Wait, was there anything? What else was on the menu? I dodged a bullet. I almost went.
Well, they had a vegetarian menu that was
I
little.
would have taken that.
Yeah,
but
for
it would
sure
have been
you
all
would have.
Broccoli.
Yeah.
Cauliflower.
Oh, you hate vegetables because you're a toddler.
No, I like lettuce.
How do you feel about poutine?
Yeah, we didn't have poutine. Okay, poutine truly is the most disgusting thing. Although my kids say they love it.
I love it.
Oh, come on.
I like
They
it.
now have gourmet poutine. Okay, poutine
I ate
is
a
French
grasshopper
fries.
once. At a
What?
Spanish, because I lost a bet with my stepson Tamler, and I had to eat. It was in a restaurant called Hugo's, a very elegant Spanish.
Oh yeah, crickets are a delicacy.
This was a grasshopper.
Yeah, well, okay, grasshopper, cricket.
Well, a grasshopper.
Tomato.
But I can still.
There's still
taste
crunchy
it.
things.
I can still. If I think it was oily.
And now they grind, like vegans grind them up and they sprinkle them on chips.
Aren't they going to? They're supposed to be, bugs are supposed to be the
like
meat
new
source
protein or whatever.
That when we run out of cows and chickens.
Poutine
Is amazing.
Yeah,
What is poutine?
Okay, poutine is
I like
French fries with gravy, with cheese curds.
Ugh.
Melted.
I don't like the word curd.
And
I
then
don't either.
And then it's like, what else is on it?
I don't
That's
want
it.
That's it. And then they're doing like gourmet things
and ketchup.
See, the gourmet, I don't like it. My ideal poutine is you go into Ontario, you're driving through like the rural vineyard parts of Ontario before you get to Toronto up on the QEW. And my family and I would just stop at a chip stand You know, those like the old-fashioned instead of a
chip truck.
Yeah, chip truck. Instead of a vegetable stand, it's French fries, and you just get like
there are
little
chip trucks all over rural Ontario. Like,
I love
is that a Canadian thing? Chip trucks.
Oh yeah,
It's not American.
But I had it with. I would always have my chips with. Get this. I would have. I hate poutine, but I would have chips with gravy and vinegar.
Chips with vinegar.
People do like.
But I would have gravy and vinegar.
But you know what? Basically, you want your French fries with ketchup.
No. Ooh, gross.
Unless you're a communist.
All right, I think we've run out. I think we've run out the clock here, and now people are going to feel sick to their stomach from our.
Yeah, I can't believe you had eel ice cream.
No, it wasn't eel ice cream. It was ice cream. It was eel pate. It was eel pate. All right. Well,
and everybody out there agrees with me, I'm sure.
They didn't taste it.
They wouldn't eat it. Who'd want it?
Squash would eat it.
The cat.
Squash. My cat.
My Labradors would eat it.
So what was on the vegetarian menu?
Oh, lovely things.
I would like that.
Tofu nuggets. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I can't remember.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Goodbye. See you next week.